On Thursday afternoon, Rishi Sunak, having attended the D-Day commemorations on both sides of the Channel, took an early bath and went back to the UK. I mean, I think there are so many things to say. The first of all is that we've said often on the podcast that Rishi Sunak is a terrible politician, and I think this is what this is. It's obviously it's ethically suspect not to be there for the whole thing, but also, I mean, it just is what he's done time and time again. He needed to be persuaded to go to COP27 in Egypt. Do you remember when he refused to meet the Greek Prime Minister because
he got the hump over
the Parthenon marbles?
Yeah,
This is a Prime Minister who thinks it's worth interviewing Elon Musk on stage, but not worth sticking about for a meeting. I mean, just look at it in a cynical political point of view. You're going to have Biden, Macron, Zelensky.
Yeah.
He handed what for me was so far the definitive image of the campaign, which was Keir Starmer talking to Zelensky at this international segment of the D-Day celebrations. And Starmer looked like not only the PM in waiting, but the PM.
Yeah,
he looked, and so just on a kind of cynical level, handing your opponent a gift like that.
And much has been said.
Amazing.
It is amazing. It is, I mean, it's dumbfounding, isn't it?
It is. And one of the quick defaults taken by journalists doing write-throughs is, he was badly advised. No. I mean, this is a decision that you take yourself.
If you need advice on that kind of thing, you shouldn't be in the job.
No, 100%.
The level of insult, much has been spoken about the insult to the veterans, quite rightly.
Yes.
And also the insult to the king, who, is having treatment for cancer. He was there and was brilliant all day long. But the level of insult to our international partners.
Well, Joe Biden was there. His son is on trial for a number of alleged felonies, and he's in the middle of a make or break election with a convicted felon and maniac Donald Trump. Macron was about to be hit by a hammer blow in the European elections. He was there.
Yeah.
It was so obvious.
The only two of the big allies who weren't there, Sunak and Putin.
Yeah, and well, indeed, and Zelensky had made his way from a country that is under illegal occupation. So the idea that the British Prime Minister at the D-Day 80th anniversary absented himself from the international part of the commemorations, I think it's very rare. So it actually beggars belief. I can't get my head around it.
I've been trying to get my head around the psychology, because I do believe that he would have been advised, don't do it. I think Cameron would have said to him, don't do it.
It's been widely leaked that Cameron was apoplectic and had his head in his hands.
What the hell, are you mad?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been trying to square off the fact that this most vainglorious of prime ministers, right, this most preening peacock, would spurn the opportunity to be photographed alongside Macron and Biden and Scholz at an international event of great stature. It just seems extraordinary. But then I think this is his fatal flaw, is he is so brittle that the desire to overcome the sense of potential humiliation that he had suffered in the debate, and he could see that tide rushing against him, his overwhelming desire to not be humiliated in that domestic scene trumped whatever little common sense he's got.
That's as good as I've heard. Yeah. I mean, the other one, which I think is weaker, is that he's going to be meeting most of these people at the G7 this week. But the truth of the matter is that the G7 meeting has far less cut through and is less important, frankly, than what will probably be the last of these every decade celebrations of D-Day. Well, it'll certainly be the last at which there are, sadly living veterans. So I think not to stay and be as part of that group just indicated his complete lack of qualification to be part of that group. It's
unreal. And for a bloody interview, a pre-recorded interview with bloody ITV.
Frankly, for anything. I mean, I had thought during the day, because I remember we mentioned in passing that we'd heard, I think this was on Thursday, that we'd heard he wasn't staying for the whole day. And I assumed that it must be that there was some very, very important governing thing, not a political thing, but something to do with security or
Cobra meetings.
Cobra,
like
there was a reason he had come back, which had to do with his role as prime minister rather than highly embattled conservative leader,
a personal
or a personal crisis.
You know.
Who knows? But I assumed it must be something like that. It didn't occur to me that he'd actually made the active choice not to be there.
Yeah.
So that happened, and it continues to run because he cancelled a number of interviews over the weekend. He said rather pathetically in some snatched remarks today that he intends to fight to the very last vote, to the very last day. Words to that effect.
Sounds like Hitler in the bunker. It's like
it sounds like that, but it's a kind of it's also within that. I think is the first sign of recognition of disastrous defeat.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down with the ship.
Yeah.
Because as inevitably over the weekend there was yet more shenanigans about. Could we get rid of him?
Yeah, Nadine Dorries.
Nadine Dorries was stoking that on the newsagents. So I think that's where he's at, and you can see he's visibly shaken, and I think can't wait for it to be over. Personally, and he's got another debate with Starmer this week. I think it's Sky News. I think on Wednesday.
Yeah,
and he's being interviewed by Nick Robinson tonight.
Yeah.
So he's got quite a few things ahead of him.
I thought Sam Coates did a great job. And that initial kind of 5-minute sit down with him it must have been the next day, wasn't it?
Yes.
And what Sam Coates identified absolutely right was that his tone was not one of apology, but one of exasperation. He was like, for God's sake, I went to Portsmouth, I went to here, I've done all the British things, and
still you want more.
On reflection, well, mate, you don't. This is not a reflection job.
No, he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't do apologies well because I don't think he means it.
No,
there was Mel Stride, the pension secretary, on doing the media round and saying, "Well, he's my friend. I know he feels very contrite and very sorry and all the rest of it." And I just don't think he is. I think he's yet again frustrated that we can't see how brilliant he is, which in the end is the point. I think that he's the kind of person who really had never failed until one doth spring statement as Chancellor.
Yeah.
And he nearly thought about ditching politics altogether.
Yeah.
He's got a glass jaw.
Yeah.
And events conspired to make him Prime Minister, after all, having lost to Liz Truss. But really, being Prime Minister is a very odd job, and it's one to which the overwhelming majority of people are completely ill-equipped, and he is one of those people.
Isn't it funny, though, Matt, how the last 5 Prime Ministers since Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, they've all blown up over an identifiable single cock-up.
Yes.
Cameron calling the Brexit referendum, May calling the general election.
And then social care,
Johnson Partygate, Liz Truss destroying the entire economy. And now Rishi Sunak deciding that D-Day wasn't important.
And I think one of the reasons that the story is running is that it so neatly crystallizes his failures.
Yeah.
Now, of course, and one could see this coming like an intercontinental ballistic missile. Farage instantly poisoned it by implying that the reason that Sunak wasn't going was a lack of cultural understanding of this country.
Well, I think it's important to get to nail the language, because he said he doesn't understand our culture.
Our culture.
And the word our
is very important.
Is the essential word. Yeah.
That was in the seven-way debate on Friday, and then pressed on it by Andrew Billen in The Times and Laura Kuenssberg on her programme on Sunday. Farage did that very Trump-esque thing of saying, I'm talking about his race. I was talking about, his class and his privilege, which is a lie. He was totally referring to his Indian heritage. And that sort of further debased what was already a pretty squalid row.
And what that tactic does, though, which is why Farage is so villainous, and you write brilliantly on it in this week's New European.
Thank you.
And I mean that most sincerely, folks. It's a really brilliant piece. Is he gives people who are slightly that way inclined and are quite happy to other community sections of our community, gives them the permission, the narrative to make them not feel that bad about it.
Well, that's the essential point about racism in the 21st century, is that with the exception of a very, very small group of fringe neo-Nazis and Aryan Brotherhood militia types, no one wants to admit to themselves that they're a racist. And populists of Farage's kind and Trump's are brilliant at giving them a kind of cover, the reason you hate Sunak or distrust him a bit or feel he's not quite right isn't because of his skin color or his parent country of origin. It's because he's a banker, or he went to a posh public school.
He hasn't had a pint with the working class person.
Now, that's just rubbish. We know exactly what Farage is doing. And in a sense, I think we're going to have to find a new word for dog whistle, because the dog whistling idea that you were sending a signal to people that only certain people could hear, it's no longer tenable, because we all know what's going on. It's dishonesty, actually, is what it is. It's a way of importing racism to the debate without admitting it. And I think that in the remaining weeks, I hope Farage will be pressed very hard on this, because he does it all the time.
Well, it would be a nice karmic symmetry if, Sunak's finished. He's finished. But if actually, funnily enough, he's got Farage handcuffed to him by Farage's association, the other side, he drags Farage down with him on this single issue. But genuinely, I can't see it.
I can't see it either, because I think that Farage is on a roll. He's got momentum. Momentum is everything in politics, and it's important to call Farage out every time, anytime. And there will be more debates at which you will do this. And on immigration, Farage, the equivalent is Farage says, it's all about capacity and infrastructure and public services. It's not to do with race, really. And on stop and search, he says it's not because I want the police to be tougher on black people. It's because I want law and order to be preserved. Come on, So I think some really punchy in interviews with Farage are in order now.
And also, you have to go, and we'll experience this because we will be as punchy as anybody in challenging,
of course,
Farage and his ilk. But one has to go into that fight knowing that you're going into a fight, and punches will be thrown back.
No, it will. It will, and he's had a career of pushing back against the charge of racism. That's in a way the story of Nigel Farage, is that he's managed to poison the mainstream whilst just stopping shy of being a kind of convictable racist.
Well, just occasionally it slips, doesn't it? With that poster of the Syrians.
Well, I think Breaking Point, the poster in 2016 during the referendum, it was only a week before the vote, was the kind of low point, really. But there's no doubt that he thinks very strongly that culture and identity are what matters. He's
absolutely.
Not really, oddly, given his background as a trader, he's not that interested in the economy. He claims to be, but really what interests him is uniculturalism. It's a very strange preoccupation, but that's odd. That's it. That's what he cares about.
Okay, interesting. I'll tell you what, why don't we take a very brief break and then come back and talk about what has happened in Europe overnight. And also, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about a theory I've got around the Liberal Democrats.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
See you in a minute. As we were saying, this Sunak gift to Farage couldn't really have come at a worse time in the broader context of what's happened overnight in Europe.
And just in passing, that quite a few days now have passed since Trump was convicted of 34 felonies.
Do you know what? I'd almost forgotten that.
And he's still ahead in the polls. The populist right is having a field day And in these European parliamentary elections, hard right parties finished first in France, in Italy, Belgium, Austria, came second in Germany and the Netherlands. This was a really big day. And what you see is, I think, a sort of ratcheting towards the far right in continental Europe, which is very, very alarming. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, who's now desperately seeking re-election as president, said the centre is holding. And a lot of people, leapt on this as evidence that actually centrism, in spite of all these gains from the far right, will prevail. But they're not quoting her in full, because what she went on to say is, but it's also true that the extremes on the left and the right have gained support, and actually it's mainly the right, and this is why the result comes with great responsibility for parties in the centre. And the immediate problem is that von der Leyen, in order to get a second, to be president again, she's really relying on the figure that is now kind of challenging Viktor Orban in Hungary as the kind of leader of the new Europe, is Giorgia Meloni in Italy.
Yes.
And she and Meloni seem to get on quite well.
Yeah.
Now, better Meloni than Marine Le Pen, okay?
I mean, it is, just to put that into context, it's only 18 months, 2 years since we were describing Meloni as like a danger to democracy.
Well, I mean, she was in her teen years a fascist.
Yeah.
She is a protege of, very much a protege of Steve Bannon, Trump's former strategist, who is about to start his jail sentence on July the 1st.
Was she tied up into the movement, Bannon's
yes, I mean, she
right-wing force?
She was already well involved in Italian politics, but very much so, and they talk a lot. And in fact, to put it in context, Rishi Sunak has tried to woo her as an ally. So she's a very powerful figure now in Europe, and that's not good news at all. And so, yes, I can see that von der Leyen might just cling on, but she'll be doing that with the assistance of Meloni's kind of command of this new and increasingly powerful bloc.
Yeah.
And so there's this centrist tendency to say, oh, thank goodness it's all over. It happened in 2020 when Biden won in America. Oh, thank goodness we can forget about MAGA. Well, here we are. Hello. There were many people after sort of Brexit and a few years had passed who said the populist wave will break. Well, it really hasn't broken. And what's going on in continental Europe, and indeed in this country, is that progressives have not found a way of coherently dealing with the question of immigration or the question of climate change, particularly. And that's a major problem, because we do need a humane, fair, swift system of border control, and a narrative that... one thing in the debate on Friday, which I was very impressed by, was Stephen Flynn, the leader of the Scottish, the Westminster leader of the SNP, really came out and made a positive defence of immigration, and it was
he was great.
It was incredible. I mean, it was electric. Because you never hear that.
I know.
And so you need that, and then we need a kind of story about climate change measures that accepts that this is going to come with a cost, but also that it's not just about saving making the planet continue to be habitable for us, but also this is a revolution in jobs and technology.
That's right.
Our kids are going to be doing green jobs. And we need to be really sort of forthright about this, because progressives are awfully on the back foot, and I've been depressed by how kind of cautious Starmer has been on immigration and the dropping of the 28 billion green pledge. All the discussions we've had about reassurance.
That's right.
But both those issues, he and every other progressive party in Europe, broadly understood, are going to have to deal with in a new way. And right quick.
And just before we move on to the Lib-Dems that I do want to talk about, the most kind of extraordinary outcome from last night was Macron calling a snap election in in France. Now, it seems like he has taken the most extraordinary gamble with not just with France, but actually with Europe.
Yeah.
In the theory goes, well, all right, let them either be done, because we accept the national elections operate very differently to the European elections. So maybe France will wake up and think, actually, the hell with that, and Le Pen and the National Rally Party will slump. Or his theory is, well, if they win, let's see what they're like for a couple of years and let them run riot. Well, they might just run riot.
I think the latter is sort of his calculation, which is, all right, they'll win, and then France will see how foolish they've been to vote for them. But I mean,
historic gamble that is.
Well, I mean, the idea that you are so convinced of your own rectitude and haughty that you are prepared to hand over the National Assembly to the other side on the basis that they're so stupid that the voters
they'll fuck it up and the voters will see it.
I mean, that seems to me to be a potentially historic error. I mean, the precedent, which is much less sort of dramatic, but that was that in 97, Chirac, who was French president, dissolved Parliament, hoping to get his own party back into the majority, and ended up with Lionel Jospin, socialist, as prime minister. Now, the results of that cohabitation were not anything like as disastrous as the prospect of Macron with either Marine Le Pen or her very peculiar, charismatic but rough at the edges 28-year-old protege, Jordan Bardella. Either of whom would be, I suppose, the candidate for prime minister if they won enough seats in a built coalition in the assembly. But an interesting point was that Jordan Bardella went up against the current prime minister, one of who's Macron's protege, also very young, Gabriel Attal, and in a debate. And Attal was magnificent and didn't have a single note and wiped the floor with Bardella because he's just a very, very good politician and policy maker. But the polls were very favourable to Bardella. I mean, this is the danger with playing with populist right-wing politicians on using old rules.
Yes.
Here's Macron saying, all right, you're so clever, you run France, right? Well, on an objective basis, that they might run France into the ground, but are you so sure the French people won't quite like the way they're doing it?
There's another precedent which kind of it's in the back of my head, and it's wrong in so many ways, or at least I hope it's historically wrong. But I once walked past a bookshop in the Cotswolds, and in the window of the bookshop was a book it was an old book, and it was called Hitler the Pawn. And the thesis of this book, it was published in 1933.
Yeah.
And the thesis of this book was how Hitler was really just an insignificant character who was a placeholder for a sop to the popular vote. And Hindenburg, of course, and all the aristocrats.
We can handle him.
We can handle him.
Yeah.
We can put him in a box. It's fine. He is of no real lasting consequence. Now, for clarity, I'm not saying that the National Rally are comparable to the Nazi
The psychology
policy.
is identical.
But the idea that, listen, the adults in the room will let the kids have a go, and then we'll step back in when everyone can see how the kids are messing it up.
Yes.
Well, that can go horrifically wrong.
Yes. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And we're always told we mustn't make comparisons with the 1930s. And I think it's right to add qualifications and caveats. But at the same time, it's quite a useful lesson, isn't it? And in this instance, it's getting a bit close to the bone.
There are too many similarities.
I think Farage and reform is another area where, again, Farage is not Hitler, just to clarify, but some of the disdain that is levelled at Farage by mainstream politicians, mainstream media, is very foolish. Go gunning for him.
Yeah.
Elephant hunting, fantastic.
Yeah.
Love it. But the kind of, don't worry about him. He's a jester. He's silly. That only encourages the people who are potential reform voters to think, hang on a minute, you can't tell me who to vote for.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, Farage is too clever to make himself look like some sort of Oswald Mosley, but he hangs around with people who would quite happily sit down and have dinner with Oswald Mosley these days.
You know, and his what would now be called his ideological journey started very far on the right. So I'm not persuaded that he is I think he is actually properly far right in his soul. And I think he's very dangerous, and I think that anyone who now dismisses him or underestimates him is a fool.
Yes.
Because I don't know what's... You see, one of the things I think that Farage is good at is understanding that politics today is not linear. So he might... Let's say if he loses Clacton, let's say he doesn't get into the House of Commons, there'll be... I guarantee you, on overnight, July the 4th, 5th, people will say Farage is finished. He's out. That's it. That's not what history suggests with Farage.
No, that's right.
You know, he has this extraordinary, what Taleb would call anti-fragility. He gets up off the ground and finds another vector.
Who? Taleb?
Nassim Taleb, who wrote the book Anti-Fragile.
Oh, no,
I don't know. It's a really
another one of my blank spots.
No. It's a really good book about how... broadly speaking, the capacity to be broken and get up again is absolutely key in the modern world. Yeah. And he goes into sort of incredible scientific detail, but the broad thesis is the really important bit because you see, Sunak is massively fragile.
Yes.
Sunak breaks.
Yes.
But Farage bends. And that's why he's so dangerous.
That's very good.
Because he'll be finished when he says he's finished.
That's right. That's very, very, very insightful.
Which worries me.
Yeah. Now, listen, just before we close off, because I do want to end on a slight note of potential, maybe even fantastical optimism, but let's run it up the flagpole.
For sure.
The Liberal Democrats are having a good campaign.
They are.
While all of this chaos is going on. Ed Davey is coming across as a man who wants to invest heavily in the NHS, which will tick a lot of boxes with people, but also a guy who is a bit of a laugh, but also has this amazing backstory of compassion and care and evidential humanity.
He doesn't take himself too seriously, which I like a lot, particularly when he's up against two people who, let's say they both come across occasionally as smug technocrats. Let's just say that, okay? The fact that he's been doing all these daft stunts actually in this context is rather fun. Yeah. But as you say, when he talks about his personal experience of caring, that I think has tremendous cut through, and people can really understand that.
When he was talking about his mother, at the launch of the manifesto, I was very moved by that.
Yes, and he said in interviews that he's worried about people who he's responsible for. What happens when he's gone.
That's right.
Now that is a kind of an instinct which anyone with children with disabilities or problems, but actually anyone with children can understand, what happens when I'm gone. And I thought he speaks human.
Right. So listen, here's
the thesis.
Here's my thesis, which might be bullshit, but anyway. When it comes to ticking the box on July the 4th, maybe the question won't be who is going to be the best prime minister, but the question will be who is going to be the best leader of the opposition. And people might be thinking it's definitely not any Tory I can think of. So I'll give Ed Davey a vote of confidence. And it's possible, as somebody said on the radio this morning, that the Tory party are in such a bad state, especially after this D-Day debacle, that they could conceivably win less actual votes than the Reform Party and win less actual seats than the Liberal Democrats. Yeah. And wouldn't it be, in my world, a better world if it was Ed Davey across the dispatch box from an all-powerful Keir Starmer nagging him about the NHS, about the benefits of closer relationships with Europe, about humanity, being a common sense guy, having a bit of a sense of humour with it? Wouldn't that be a better combo?
The other thing is Ed Davey knows about government. Yeah. He's been a cabinet minister in the coalition. Yeah. So he would ask questions with knowledge and insight. Yeah. And the reason I think your thesis is a really good one, actually, and quite an appetizing one, is that the circumstances of this general election campaign are unique, in my experience anyway, which is that there is almost open recognition that the result is already foregone.
Yeah.
I mean, the image I referred to earlier with, of Starmer and Zelensky is kind of symbolic of that. But it was fascinating in the seven-way debate on Friday that not only did Penny Mordaunt just without any compunction throw Sunak under the bus over the D-Day and say it was very wrong.
Yeah.
No attempt to excuse it. Very wrong.
Just smote him with her sword.
Right?
Yeah.
But there was also a thing which hasn't been picked up on, which is she said of Angela Rayner during an exchange, you better watch out, she might be Prime Minister in 5 years. Now, what that implies is Starmer wins and Rayner takes over after 5 years of Starmer. It was an incredible thing to say. Now, and of course, Farage begins every single interview with Labour has already won. Now, the reason that that's important is because I think people will be thinking exactly as you just described, which is, who do I want up against Starmer? There'll be seats where the pencil will hover.
Yeah.
And they think, well, hang on a minute, do I really want Suella Braverman potentially aligned with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage? Or do I want this lot who have been through the fire since their disastrous election in 2015 after the coalition, and have come back with, a reasonable suite of policies and whatever else you say about them, their heart in the right place. Yes. Now, Starmer, let's say things go as they seem to be going, Starmer ends up with a pretty hefty majority. How much better, to your point, to have Lib-Dems there saying, hang on a minute, how does that actually help the NHS?
Yes.
Well, what are you doing about social care?
Yeah.
Or, it's funny, Prime Minister, you haven't mentioned Brexit in the first 100 days.
I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, Ed Davey, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, given the absolute manifest damage Brexit's done to this country, why are we not exploring a way back in today? Why not?
The first PMQs of the Starmer era.
Yeah.
The leader of the opposition, Ed Davey, imagine that was his first question.
My God, wouldn't that just be great?
It would transform the landscape in a single sentence, because at the moment, for all the reasons we've endlessly rehearsed, no one is really talking about it at all.
Yeah.
But in one question over the dispatch box, you could make it top of the agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, we could be agenda fluid.
We could be agenda fluid. I love that.
I mean, I think this is, I think we should be, in as much as we ever urge people to do one thing or another. Actually, this might just be genius, which is if you're wondering if you're in a situation where you're in a seat where it's going to matter to the composition of the opposition, vote Lib Dem.
Yeah. On the basis that you're not talking about, we know who the Prime Minister is going to be.
We do that.
But the big important question now is, who is going to be the leader of the opposition?
If you're in a Lib Dem Tory marginal,
then vote Lib Dem.
Don't even, that's a two-mats policy, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got a policy.
We have a at last.
Go on.
Bravo. Well, anyway, folks, thank you, Matt. That was brilliant.
That was good.
Really, I enjoyed it. I hope the listeners enjoyed it. Please get in your feedback and any questions to us at 2mats@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS at tnepublishing.com. Don't forget your great subscription offer. You get all of our journalism for as little as £1 a week and a £25 voucher to spend at our shop. Loads of amazing goodies there. Support independent journalism against nationalism. That's what we're asking you to do.
Absolutely. On Friday, we'll reveal our new policy on potholes. So,
So join us for that.
We're motoring.
Join us for that. And thanks to Rethink Audio. And
have a good day.
Have a fantastic day.